Welcome back, everybody, to Passage to Profit. This is Richard and Elizabeth Gearhart here, and we're going to be talking now with our guest this evening, JD Gershbein. And JD is a CEO of Alish Communication, and he is a speaker, a raconteur, a provocateur, an improviser, writer, social scientist, business psychologist, humorist, philosopher, consultant, coach, video producer, broadcaster, marketer, improvisational comic, cartoonist, playwright, blogger, blues pianist, cinephile, and a pizza connoisseur. So,
hey, JD, what don't you do?
No. But before we do that, it's a very impressive list. But I want to know, what is your favorite pizza, and what makes for a pizza connoisseur?
He's in Chicago, so okay.
All right, he gets extra pizza credit for that for sure. So,
well, am I really all that? What on earth is my deliverable? I do all these, but what am I actually producing? Yes, I am all those things. Thanks for having me, everybody, and great to be here in this digital environment with you. What makes for great pizza? I think taste.
All right,
it's got to taste really good. And boy, I'll tell you, thin crust, thick crust, pan, you name it, it's all good.
I grew up in the Chicago area, and we used to go to Gino's East. I don't even know if it's still there anymore. But when we went, there was lines around the block because it was so good. So, are they still there? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
They are still here.
Uh-huh.
They're nestled in the greater downtown Chicago area. Still a very cozy place.
Yeah.
Good za, as we like to say. When you're in Chicago, you call it za. Let's get some za. Yes, I'd like a slice of za, please.
We haven't been to Chicago for a long time. We'll have to go back for the za.
Well, come on, I'll take you out for za.
All right.
Okay.
It's a deal. And do they send by FedEx or?
Well, you do have a couple. Yes, you do have Lou Malnati's. I'm giving them a plug and a half here. They have their pie in the sky. You can order it shipped on blue ice, and they'll come right to your door, ready to go.
I'm totally down for that.
I see another 10 pounds coming on.
They ship all over the world.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's really great. So,
he's also a LinkedIn specialist.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us about that?
Oh, that's right. That's the day job, right?
Yeah.
At this point, I think we all have to specify day job versus side hustle these days. That is true. The information you have is correct. And I was one of the first independent LinkedIn consultants, hung out my shingle in 2006 at a time when nobody was outsourcing me for the work I do today. And a lot of things had to happen for me to have a career. And fortunately, they did.
So what's the most important thing to do on LinkedIn?
I think it's to participate, Elizabeth. And I'm not being tongue in cheek at all. I think what we've seen, and when you look at pre-pandemic, peri-pandemic, and post-pandemic, and if we're trying to inch our way toward a post-COVID-19 world as we tape here today, what happened before isn't working, and the platform is ever changing. It's as dynamic can be. And whereas everything around LinkedIn is changing, best practices have remained best practices. So we still have to communicate with people, and we still have to put our digital best foot forward. Yeah. And we still have to leverage the medium to its full potential. Those who are not taking the time to really absorb what they're seeing, or bringing critical thinking or design thinking to what's happening in front of them, they're missing out. They are not seeing the opportunities that the site presents. Mm-hmm. And the nature of my practice is to help people key in and become finely attuned to those opportunities. So when they do present, you're prepared.
I mean, one of the challenges, I think, is, generating original content. I mean, I think, we want to be, we want to project ourselves. We want people to know who we are. What kinds of advice do you give for LinkedIn people to kind of help kind of help build the content library and, form positive impressions on their LinkedIn network?
I think that it really comes down to a commitment to excellence and developing a very tight-knit association with your product, service, company, skill set, or niche, and making sure that everything is kind of what we would call on brand. I work with people on a daily basis who want to stand out. JD, I want to stand out. Can you help me build a brand? And I can to a certain point, but there are so many things that we can't control when it comes to building this vague, nebulous concept called a brand. That kind of builds for us in the hearts, minds, and eyes of the people with whom we're interfacing. And LinkedIn gives us the infrastructure to do that. So what I'm doing and the way that I challenge my clients and students is to become so closely associated and bundled in with what it is they do that when that conversation comes up, that they surface right to the top. There's a concept I've elucidated called the psychic hierarchy, what other folks might call top of mind. And top of mindedness becomes super important right now because we're all self-absorbed. We're all forgetting. We're all having things fall through the cracks on a daily basis.
Thank God you said that.
When you're able to stay in front of people on a regular basis, which, as you say, is through original content, you have a fighting chance.
Right.
That's really great advice. I mean, what do you think about video versus still pictures? I kind of am. Mm-hmm. I'm torn between the two, and I think it has to be super good content for me to listen to a video. What do you think?
Interestingly, I was one of the first to put video on LinkedIn at a time when LinkedIn's hosting capabilities for video were very crude by today's standards. Now, all you have to do is basically just channel it in right from your iPhone. But it's not about having a video right now, Elizabeth. It's about having video that's going to be watched, and that there's something that your viewer will take away. And much of the video that I see, and I'm going to just speak frank here. May I speak frank? You would want me to speak frank. I know. I was waiting for that, Richard. Thank you for explaining that. So much of the video that we see is unwatchable. There's no messaging. There's no value being created or disseminated. And there's a difference now in producing video that's just for video's sake and video that's truly going to get watched and does your brand a favor. So I'm always encouraging people who want to elevate and have a voice and use visual branding. Video is the most powerful disseminator of brand we have, but it's got to be polished. It's got to be good. And you've got to come off as authentic and purposeful and relate to the viewer somehow. Call to action notwithstanding, it's how you parse yourself out through video on a daily or regular basis that's going to get you the incoming traffic.
What do you think about using humor? I know that now you and I had a really interesting conversation about improving your business. And that's something you're teaching people to do now, which I've never, ever heard of that before.
Improv has a role in business, and it's even a more deeper role than we originally envisioned, because the same tenets of communication that you would use on stage apply in a sales scenario. And I've studied improv since I was in my late 20s and performed with a troupe back then where there were really no outlets outside the famed Second City in Chicago, where I took some classes back in the day when it was cool to say you were taking classes at the Second City in Chicago. And I re-upped. Back in 2017, I engaged a coach to help me with my solo performance as a speaker. I wanted to just really upskill my stagecraft. And she tells me, JD, why don't you just sign up for long form and short form improv? I've seen your website. I wasn't looking to audition for Saturday Night Live, but why not pick up a few chops to help me become a better communicator? And while I was in those classes and returned to my study of improv, I saw the applicability immediately. And applied improvisation, which is a huge field, a burgeoning field right now, is an area of interest for me, because I truly believe that the techniques of applied improvisation can help people in business, both in the online and in the real world.
So that sounds so cool. How can you give us some examples of how that might work?
Certainly. If you go to any improv textbook, you'll see all the techniques. And I know we don't have the time to go into that, but improv is a very gamified exercise. There's a lot of things you do to just kind of get your mind all nimble and agile and ready to receive. And that's really the key aspect of being on stage in an improv troupe, is supporting your scene partners. And I call everybody a scene partner. You folks on my screen right here, I've got 6 of you. We look like the Brady Bunch setup right here. You're my scene partners. And the key to improv, the key to good improv is listening. The key to good digital communication is listening. You have to react, and you have to be proactive in your reactions. And that's what I try to do. I try to be there for my scene partners. I encourage them to contribute. It's not about me laying a funny line in a scene or a skit. It's about playing off what I get, the so-called being present in the moment. And there's so many distractions coming at us. It's difficult to remain present in the moment, isn't it? There are folks you could be looking at right through the webcam, and you know that they're on their email or they're shopping somewhere, and yet they're maintaining eye contact with the camera, pretending to do a good job of listening, but then they have that kind of frozen deer in the headlights moment where they're to respond, and you get the feeling that they weren't there in the first place for you. So engaged conversation is.
So that's
really,
kind of replaced heckling, right? You know, is
to a certain point. Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you look at the threads in email that lead to business wins, it's a matter of extending the conversation, not being a distraction, not spending 5 or 6 emails just to get a cup of coffee or a Zoom call on the calendar, but really creating touch points in business that appeal to the sensibilities of who you're corresponding with. And that's where I feel applied improv really works. I'm keeping hundreds of conversations in play at once. How in the hell do I do that? Well, I fall back on improv. I'd like to thank my nervous system for the ability to fire my synapses in a way that allows me to see value in what I do. I don't look at any of the online world as a necessary evil, folks. Since day one, since the moment I sent my first email, I thought this was something amazing, and I'm hardwired for it.
So Kenya, what do you have to say?
I just wanted to know, what are some LinkedIn profile must-haves? And I had a backup question. Is it possible for you to show us a little improv technique here on the show? No pressure. I just throwing it out there.
I think the most important thing for your LinkedIn profile is to make sure your name, both first and last, are spelled correctly. Because after that, everything kind of falls into place. You know, I'm really not the tips guy. I was early on, because so many of the so-called tips are being spewed out by others as best practices, and it's really common sense at this point. I think when you look at the way that the LinkedIn profile is formatted, it's very unique in the social media world, Kenya, in that all social platforms have a central core called a profile. But on LinkedIn, it's built out more than most. It's limitless in its ability to store and warehouse content for us. And we choose how we want to populate it. So to play into your question, I subscribe to the notion of iceberg theory. Y'all remember Ernest Hemingway, the great writer, who said that the economy of writing should be very fluid and very simple, and that the writer should be able to convey a thought in as few words as possible. And I think to a certain point, that's what we want to do on our LinkedIn profiles. We're under immense pressure now to be storytellers. And those who are good stewards of their story will find the LinkedIn profile a much more inviting place for them to just share what has happened on the way to becoming who they are now. And a good LinkedIn profile will merge past accomplishments with present value with an eye toward the future. So what I try to do for each of the clients I work with is let folks know, here's what they did, here's what they're capable of doing now, and here's what they can do in the future. And here are the merits of working with them. So that doesn't come off as a snake oily sales pitch. And I think that's the problem with most profiles today. It's just about folks telling other folks how cool they are and not really paying attention to client pain. and not aligning themselves with the power of their solution. They're just talking about what it is they did. There's this achievement. They're an Amazon.com bestseller. They're a keynote speaker. They're in the Forbes top 50. I mean, client doesn't care about that, really.
Excellent. So
and about the improv games, we can get into some improv games. You know, the fundamental component of improv is the yes, comma, and ... where you say something and I start my response by stating yes, and yes, and is the hallmark of the Second City approach to improv. So, Coach Kenya, I will ask you to just say whatever comes into your mind. You know, could be something related to this broadcast or not. Say something that comes into your mind, and I'll try to extend it with a yes and technique. Okay, and the goal is to give you something back. It could be as absurd as possible. It could have nothing to do relating to what you just said, but it could be on the same path. And we try to kind of tell a story together.
Okay, great. Are we doing it now?
Can I play too?
And you'll start yours with yes and. Yeah, we can go around the room.
All right, let's go around the room.
Cool.
So Kenya, you start and I'll set the example.
So Passage to Profit is a great way to connect and meet other people and expand your network.
Yes, and people can listen to it while they're on the treadmill or walking their dog.
Yes, and they'll learn all sorts of things about intellectual property and hear about some amazing guests.
Yes, and they will learn about everything from animals to computer programs to clothes to jewelry to you name it. Yes.
Wind it up.
Yes, and they will forget about it as they're hearing it until they play the replay that same evening. So that's how the yes and momentum builds. And when you go around in a class setting, you'll hear some fairly ridiculous yes ands, but it's just designed to, again, exercise the fluidity of the mind and just bring out the response. It's not about being funny, but it's about extending the conversation. And how does this apply, JD? All LinkedIn is effective conversation management and keeping these exchanges in play.
Oh, sounds like fun. And we'll have.
It's fun.
We should do like a improv thing every Passage to Profit show. What do you think?
Right. So we should do the yes and. So we should keep going. So September, yes and.
Yes, and Passage to Profit, being a guest on this show is a great way to get yourself up really early if you live on the West Coast.
Erica?
Yes, and I woke up today at 6:30 in the morning.
And Roy?
Yes, and I can't wait to learn more about Italian leather shoes.
Oh,
there you go. Gearhart, we've turned your broadcast into an improv class. How about
we love it. Yay. Thank you for that. That's great. So, well, that's really world.
I just want to say, LinkedIn has become an incredibly powerful tool for business owners. And the first thing I do is look for somebody on LinkedIn. And a lot of times, well, you know about my interviewing business. When I interview people, I looked at their LinkedIn profile and use that to try to figure out some questions to ask them, because I think that's where people really put who they are, right, JD? And
ideally.
It's very important.
Ideally. And when people are willing to go deep on their stories, that's where you truly learn about them as human beings and not professionals who are just trying to sell a product or service. And I think that's how we stand out. It's hard to believe that you could stand out by being authentic these days. And authenticity and empathy and humility, these are the great traits of leadership. And when you apply them to fashioning your LinkedIn brand infrastructure, that's what moves the needle. That's what creates business wins or career advancement, is by cracking open the window to your world just a little and exposing your humanity. And that's all I've done. I made one switch on my LinkedIn profile during the pandemic because we were all affected and impacted greatly. And most people that I'm working with nowadays are going through a full-scale rebrand. A pivot notwithstanding, they're rebranding and they're literally jump shifting into new business worlds. And part of that rebrand comes from deep self-awareness and deep self-assessment, which I've done as well. And if I'm going to be this personal brand strategist I claim to be, I better have walked my talk and lead by example. So I use the term human-centered design thinking to approach my clients and students, and putting themselves under the microscope in a positive way and fleshing out their narrative. What has to be told? What do you want to leave under the iceberg? Iceberg theory again, what's underneath the iceberg and what people don't see. The more you push yourself over the waterline, the greater information that exists about you. You give people a chance to make an informed decision about your capabilities and whether they would want to collaborate or work with you.
Yes. And we unfortunately have to end this segment. So we'll be back with more Passage to Profit with our guest, JD Gershbein.
Who you can find on LinkedIn.
Who you can find on LinkedIn.
Surprising, isn't it?
And we'll be back right after this message. So stay with us.